Okay, Buford tells us it's time to get going this morning. We've had a few minutes to talk this morning, but good morning to everybody that's here. I'm glad we got a good crowd here this morning and hope we got a few people watching on Facebook this morning. We've got a good lesson to look at. We've had some really good lessons talking about Elijah and Elisha, and we remember that Elisha had asked for a double portion of the blessing that Elijah had on him. So, Elisha is going to have a lot of great things he's going to see in his life. The name of the lesson this morning says Elisha's Heavenly Defenders. And I put the subtitle of the lesson as To See or Not to See. And this scripture is coming from 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 through 18. The golden text for this week is the angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth them. So he's saying that the Lord encampeth round about and fear him, and he's just not talking about Elisha, he's talking about people around about him and deliver them, talking about people that serve the Lord, that have given and committed themselves to the Lord. The lesson aim says, if we are true Christians, God is on our side. Therefore, we need not fear, though a host encamp against us. And if we can ever get it together, Rhonda has there's a song about Thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, that she's going to sing one Sunday morning if we can get the tune just right. But I think it's a really beautiful song that tells us, that we have the Lord that watches us in all situations. And
Rhonda, is you or no?
Rhonda, as in your Rhonda. Yeah, no, you won't hear me singing. You will hear Rhonda Silverthorne singing. It wouldn't be such a beautiful song if I sang it. You all may never want to hear that one again. The lesson background I wanted to read also in here, it says, as the Elisha stories are probably not in chronological order, the dates are uncertain. This most probably took place at the end of the reign of Jehoram, son of Ahab and Jezebel. It was in the period of confusion and revolution which ended in the extermination of Jezebel's brood. So, remember when we were studying about Ahab and Jezebel, and remember that they were the most wicked of the wicked. And finally, the prophet foretold to them that they wouldn't continue on the throne, that they would meet a very harsh death. And I think he said the dogs would lick their bones. And so we're in the reign of their son at this time when this happened. So I'm going to go ahead and read the scriptures, and then we'll kind of backtrack just a hair. So starting in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 8, it says, Then the king of Syria warred against Israel and took counsel with his servants, saying, In such and such a place you shall be my camp. And the man of God sent unto the king of Israel, saying, Beware that thou pass not such a place, for thither the Syrians are come down. And the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God told him, and warned him of, and saved himself there, not once nor twice. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled for this thing, and he called his servants and said unto them, Will ye not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, None, my lord, O king. But Elisha the prophet that is in Israel telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. And he said, Go and spy where he is, and I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, saying, Behold, he is in Dothan. Therefore sent he thither horses and chariots and a great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host compassed the city both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto them, Alas, my master, how shall we do? And he answered, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, Smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And he smote them with blindness, according to the word of Elisha. So we remember a couple weeks back, we were talking about Nathan. Remember, he was the highest man in the Syrian army, and he had been smitten with leprosy, and he was looking for somebody, some cure, because that was a very terrible disease. And we remember with the people in Israel that if somebody had leprosy, that they were banished from the town, that they kind of had their own camp, and they had to yell unclean, unclean when they walked up to somebody. But we remember that there was a little servant girl that had been taken captive during these battles between the Syrians and the Israelites that had told Nathan's wife about the or not the possibility, but that if he went before the prophet of the Lord, he would be cured. So we know that there's been some movement between these camps. We know that, and we remember that Nathan went to the king, or the Syrian king, to ask leave to go see this prophet. And we remember that the Syrian king gave him gold and silver and changes of clothes and a letter asking the king to cure him. And we remember the Israelite king got really mad because he was like, does he think that I can cure this man? And he thought he was just festering up the battle again. So by that, we know that there's been some kind of contact between the two of them. And we remember that Nathan did come to Elisha and that he was cured. We remember he came with a lot of pride when he originally came, and when he told him to go. When first, remember, Elisha wouldn't even come out and see him, and he was a little bit ruffled because he was a great man. And for somebody, you go over to their house and they won't even walk out and say hi to you. They send their servant. Would kind of ruffle the feathers if you thought you were, a high and mighty stature, that people should come out and bow before you. But remember, his friends talked him into going and doing what the prophet told him. And then afterwards, Nathan did a total roundabout face from him, and that he had said that I will go back to my kingdom. And he asked Elisha, he said, will the Lord forgive me if I go in with my king when he goes to worship these other gods? But he said, but he was going to worship the Lord. And then he also asked, remember, he gathered up enough dirt to make a spot of worship for the Lord when he went back to his country. So we need to remember, that connection. Sometimes we don't remember things that we should. I've talked about and never do, maybe occasionally, but not normally, how remember on the staffs back in the Bible time that when the shepherds, when there was a big occurrence or something, that they would kind of write their stories on the staff, and that way it brought it to remembrance to them when something happened to them. Because a lot of times we, when we're in turmoil or something and not thinking right, the last thing we do is remember, remember when the Lord did this for me, and here I am working again. But, that they had these things written that they could look at and that would ensure them, I was able to kill this bear in Mount Lion before, and I'm sure I can do that again if I do that. So it is a good thing to keep in remembrance. And, for me, because I don't even write down to look back at, these were things that happened, but this was the end. Because we think we know the best way, but we really, most of the time, we don't. We sometimes get ourselves into more trouble than out of trouble with that. So this lesson starts out saying, then the king of Syria warred against Israel and took counsel with his servants, saying, in such and such a place shall be my camp. So apparently the war has continued with Israel and the Syrians. You might think that after what happened with Naaman, that they might have taken notice that, that they have a God greater than our God, and maybe even try to become allies with them, but that's not what happened. They continued in a war, and so he's meeting with his advisors and his spies and stuff, and he's making plans to go against the Israelites here. And it says in verse 9, and the man of God sent unto the king of Israel, saying, beware that thou pass not such a place, for thither the Syrians are come down. So from this passage, we see that Elisha apparently knows what they're planning on doing, that, God must be speaking to him and giving him the plans of these armies as they make a strategy. Well, we're going to go down here and we're going to meet them here, and, we're going to have our troops wait to ambush them or whatever. But Elisha has heard what's going on, and he's going into his king in Israel, and he's telling them these things, that, this is what their plans are. It says, according to the lesson, the work of God's prophets is to give us warning. If being warned, we do not save ourselves, it is our own fault, and our blood will be upon our own head. The king of Israel would regard the warnings Elijah gave him of his danger by the Syrians, but not the warnings he gave him by the danger of his sins. So, as we see, the king is listening to Elijah, and he's not doing these things. He's taking his army and making other plans when he does it. But he says, even though he's willing to do this, he's not willing to change his own life and do different personally, as Elisha warns him. And it says, the work of God's prophets is to give us warning. If being warned we do not save ourselves, it is our own fault. And, we have prophets. Buford is our prophet here right now, that he stands up here Sunday after Sunday giving us warnings, telling us, revealing to us the word of God. But notice it says, if being warned we do not save ourselves, it is our own fault, and our blood will be upon our own head. So the same we saw with Elijah as with the pastors, with Buford and all the pastors, that, they do stand up here and they warn us, they give us word from the Bible, but he doesn't beat us up as we go out the door. We have to decide whether we're going to listen and take heed to that, or it's going to go right over our head. We check it off that we showed up at church Sunday morning and got that off my list, or whether we take it into our heart, and when we go out the doors that we live by this, and we strive to do the Lord's will, not just in here, but every day that we do it. But, the prophets don't make people do that. They're sent to give the word of the Lord. And sometimes it's not. We don't want to do it. It's not. As we saw generally with Elijah, it wasn't an easy task for them. That they got the consequences sometimes of telling, as do preachers. People don't want to hear the word as it is. I saw something on Facebook. Michelle might have put it on, but it was talking about that the word of the Bible is not what we want it to be. We can't change it and make it say what only, or we can't read only the things that we like. We have to take the complete whole Bible as the truth, and that, we don't determine what it says, that it's the Lord's word, and it's, really getting messed up as in, we interpret it for what our ears can hear, what it says. In verse 10 it says, and the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God told him and warned him of, and saved himself there, not once nor twice. So, as we said, the king's listened to Elijah, and he's keeping his men out of there, and it's happened more than one time that he has saved his army from, and you know, I'm sure this Syrian army was a tough group that to deal with once that, because you know that they had many chariots and horses, and you know they were strong and they were sweeping through the land. It says in 11, therefore the heart of the king of Assyria was sore troubled for this thing, and he called his servants and said unto them, will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? So he's kind of mad right now, and he thinks, I put a note here, he thinks he's got a double agent in the gang, because it said that he was taken on to his, let me see, where I read it, would take him to his bed chamber. That, you know, they were meeting in a secret place. They weren't just out in the middle of the city and he had a loudspeaker. It was going over the TV set. Well, we're going to do this next. But he was taking his most trusted group of men, but somehow it appeared that somebody was telling every move that he said. So it's like if he had one of his men that would come in there and pretend like he was for him, but it was going out, and he said, will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? So he's wanting that spy to step out and show himself. It's like, who's going out and telling every move? Because how else could, in his mind, how else is the word getting out? You know I'm not telling anybody, I'm telling this select group, but somehow they're always ready for us, and they got away from us. So the king's getting really angry. And verse 12 says, and one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. Here's what I could say. So this had to kind of nudge the old king to remember what the God of Elijah and the God of Israel had done for Naaman. Because remember, we say he's already had a little bit of contact, and he knows that the God of Israel is able to do things that they weren't able to have done by their own gods that they were worshiping. And one of the men knew that it was Elisha that was doing this. And in verse 13 it says, and the king said, go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, saying, behold, he is in Dothan. So, you know, he believed that this was what was happening. Apparently he had a little bit of, got his memory back of what he had done, and that he had, you know, faith that this man was able to do this. So now his plan is to go get this man that is able to change or to thwart all his efforts and what he was doing. And in verse 14 it says, therefore sent he thither horses and chariots and a great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about. And remember back then, where we have, you know, jets and missiles and stuff like that, they're probably highest pieces of war equipment, and that made more fear were the chariots and the horses. Because, you know, these charioteers had weaponry, but they had the horses that could give them the speed to go against it. So to intimidate somebody, you're going to send your best stuff out there. So, you know, imagine he has sent this army, and he set them up around Dothan, where Elisha is, to come get him. And it would be scary if, you know, it says they came at night. So if we woke up in the morning and you looked outside and there's this army sitting around you that you didn't know, you didn't hear, had come around here. there were a couple things I wanted to read out the book here. It says, the Syrian king, enraged with the prophet for frustrating his military designs on Israel, sends horses and chariots and a great host in pursuit of him. Here were enemies which the prophet himself could not subdue, perils from which his unaided power could not extricate himself. So just Elijah, this was more than he could handle. And you know, if we walked out and saw this and you know, we're just in the house and it'd be like, I mean, even if you had guns and ammo and you had a whole host of armies around you, you'd have to realize, I ain't gonna last long. You know, I like to get a few licks in, but it's over. And it says, true in these days, the antagonists of the good are not so outwardly as visible as they are in times that are past. Let me see. So it's telling us that we have these enemies still. We're not, well, I won't say that right now. We war against invisible armies all the time, that if our physical eyes could see what was about us trying to fight us, or even about our family members trying to do. Says their forms fascinate rather than terrify. They seek to draw rather than drive. But still, are they any less deadly in their aim or formidable in their power because they change their guard, drop the sword, and stretch out the hand of false friendship? So the lesson was saying, you know, a lot of enemies we have are pretty. They come to us, and it says they come to us, they fascinate rather than terrify. They seek to draw rather than to drive. So like drugs, which if you think, you never hear of a good drug problem, but that they come in a nice form, that this is going to make you feel good and your problems are all going to be gone, and if you do this. So it doesn't come to you at first of the horrors and what happens to your life once you do this, but the good stuff is presented to you of how good this is going to make you feel. And you know, a lot of people start with drugs, but they may have been in a terrible accident or something horrible has happened. And it does start out as, you know, this will give you relief from the pain that you're in and you won't feel bad. So it draws you in and it draws you in, and it's good at first because you might get a little relief from that pain. But then, you know, you don't realize that you then have to take more and more and more, and it doesn't help the pain anymore. You know, your body builds that tolerance. And that's what, you know, the lesson is looking at for ours is, you know, sometimes there's a pretty draw to this instead of just the harshness of it.
A lot of people don't understand too that, you know, the biggest enemy is that.
It's, yes.
I mean, ourselves is our biggest enemy.
He can't make you do it.
But he
Yes,
can push.
yes, yes. And then you choose.
Yeah.
This or that. Yeah, that is a good point. There's some. There, in the teacher's book, there's some extra stuff. I wanted to read. It says there are 10,000 ways in which God can bring the counsels of men to no effect whenever he pleases. So, you know, we can do whatever we want, plan whatever we want, but, you know, if it's something against God's will, it says there are 10,000 ways he can bring them to no effect whenever he pleases. It says Ben-Hadad, who is the Syrian king, ought to have known that it was God, not merely the prophet against whom he was contending, and that it would be impossible to outwit the source of wisdom, the giver of all knowledge and understanding. Men in all ages have thought, and vainly thought, to hoodwink and outwit God. But every attempt of man to cheat his maker recoils on his own head. So, my grandmother would say, get bigger than your own britches. Sorry, I thought I was getting past this allergy stuff. But, Ben Hadad had seen the power of God before. We've seen the power of God. But we still sometimes try to maybe do something secret, maybe do our own thing. But there's no way, the Lord sees everything that we do. As you see, he was seeing everything that Ben Hadad was doing, and he was telling Elisha, who was able to go back. So there's nothing we can do in secret. We might think we can, man might not can see us. We might even just think it in our mind and not do it outward, but the Lord sees it no matter in any circumstances. If it's a fleeting thought or whatever that does, he's aware of everything that goes on in our life. And in verse 15, it says, and when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, alas, my master, how shall we do? So apparently Elijah must sleep in a little bit late, and his servant got up and opens the door, and they're surrounded by all these chariots and this whole army, and it would scare you. It just truly would. It was talking about this man, the servant at first, and the lesson was talking about that, he didn't have any care or kind of his faith or whatever. But you think if Elijah, and maybe he didn't realize as sure as Elijah did the movement that God would make about this, because this man, he was scared. Apparently, you see him, he runs back in the door and shuts the door back. And I just like to visualize what this stuff's happening. I mean, he had to been really scared. What would you do with an army against you? So he's saying, alas, my master, how shall we do? And the lesson here says, it is the constant aim of Bible teaching to lift us above this point of view, to give us a higher one. So this servant was seeing man's view of this only. We're going to see the difference between him and Elisha. It says, in the lesson says, how much more active we should be, how much more earnest in Christian work if we realize that God is working with us. With what power a minister ought to preach if he could only remember to say that John the Baptist, there cometh one mightier than I after me. So, the servant at that point was strictly seeing out of fleshly, earthly man's eyes, and it was too big. It was, and think about our lives and think back and things that have happened and things we've gone through that our first thought or in our first glance, and sometimes we go into it and then think of the Lord, but things that it's too big. I can't do this. And there are many, maybe most things that without him we can't handle. It's more than we can do. And that's where this servant, and in verse 16, and this is speaking of Elisha, and he answered, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. So he's saying, my God is bigger than all those chariots and all their gods they think that are with them. And that's not changed. This is the Old Testament, before Jesus came to earth, that their God was bigger. He's the same God as he was then, now. And Elisha saying, we got this covered. My God is mightier than that army and their gods with them. And it says in verse 17, and Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened his eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. So we look at this physically, what Elisha, when he prayed and he asked the Lord to open his servant's eyes, because apparently Elisha was aware of all this, and he opened his eyes. He's got the Syrian chariots all surrounding him, but all of a sudden he looks out, and there's this bigger host of armies surrounding, and it says, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire around about Elisha. So the Lord, he saw that the Lord had a bigger army than their army. He saw that with his fleshly eyes. And, that's something that Elisha was saying that we also need to. We know that the Lord's army of hosts is round about us, that we don't see with our fleshly eyes, but with our spiritual eyes, that there's always battles going around us, and we have to pray for the aid and assistance of the Lord, and sometimes pray that we see these things, because sometimes you get so weak and exhausted from the battle that you kind of lose sight of what the Lord's doing, and that he has plans and that he has paths already built for you, but we don't necessarily know them. And in verse 18 it says, and when they came down to him, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And he smote them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. And the lesson, I'll read, it says, Elisha led them 12 miles to Samaria, the capital. Here, their sight being restored, they found Elisha in his own city, and they were captives in the midst of the enemies. Jehoram wanted to kill them, but Elijah indignantly objected to this and instead applied them with abundant food and sent them home. So, once Elijah asked that all this army be blinded, so once that happened, they were pretty much a blind army is not going to be able to do much with, no matter if they have chariots, horses, or whatever. And so they were led to where that the Israelites were surrounding them and had the upper hand, and the king wanted to kill them all. But we see that Elisha was like, don't touch them. And it said that he wanted to give them abundant food and send them home. It says he heaped coals of fire on their head. So this is, doing good to somebody that has intentions to do bad against us, that sometimes it's hard to do. But, it is the thing to do. It's harder to pray for somebody that's against you than to pray for a friend that is for you. But a lot of these men have come to take Elisha, and I guess I would assume the king was going to use him as a weapon, forced to use him as a weapon against his own people, but it didn't happen. And I'll read you a little bit more of it. The lesson writer says, this is true revenge. This is the great miracle. If thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in doing so, thou shalt heap coals of fire in his head. Love your enemies is the great Christian maxim. Here is Christ operating in Elijah. Here is the pre-incarnate Son of God. Here is the gospel of the Old Testament. So Elijah is doing just as the Lord would have him do in this situation, is to not, that they could have killed these men, chopped them up, sent them back in front of the whole, they were really at their mercy, but he gave them mercy instead. And one more, it says, having gotten them into our power, let them hear us pray. Let them observe how liberal we can be. Let them carry back to the land of Syria the news that the kings of Israel are merciful kings, and the prophets of Israel are men of great, glowing, noble hearts. In this way, by our benefactions, we preach without words. In this way, we comment upon the spirit of the cross, which is the spirit of love. So instead of sending the message back of brutal ravage in the army and, you know, that we can do this, they sent back a message of mercy to the kings. And, you know, we always look at the lessons and how does this affect us, because we live in the year of 2021. But we can do these same things, not against armies, apparently, single-handedly, but remember that people that come to war against us, that you don't do bad for that. Nothing comes good of that. It says it. We commend upon the spirit of the cross, which is the spirit of love. Does anybody have anything to add? Okay, we'll go through a couple of these questions. We have a few minutes. It says, how was the king of Syria foiled?
Well, God that revealed to Elisha what they were going to do to the kingdom of Israel. So he wanted the king that way.
Okay, so God stepped in the picture on Israel's side. Says what people resort to excessive secrecy.
I think it's the people that are up to no good.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do something good, you don't care who knows.
Yes. Like if you're gonna tell a lie, you better have your story straight. Because as we know, once you tell a lie, and then the next person asks you something about it, and you kind of that may have seen the truth, and you gotta tell the same story the second time. And then sometimes you kind of embellish, it builds up, you know, because then somebody else that may have seen and know you're lying will try to throw you off and stuff. But if you don't lie, if you're telling the truth, you don't have to deal with all that. You told the truth. So these people that are lying or making plans to do evil stuff want to be really secret. I mean, it says, what was the king's next foolish move?
Sending all those soldiers and chariots that they captured Elisha brings back.
Because he knew God. He had met with God through Naaman. What terrified Elisha's servant?
And we got all the soldiers out there and chariots he thought they had.
Yeah, he saw a bunch of swords and chariots. It says, what foes surround us? Is there Syrians out here?
Yeah, there's evil all around us. And
Yeah. Some we can see and some we can't see. It says, which of these are most dangerous?
they're all dangerous. As far as that goes, if we're weak and not strong and faith.
True. Why was the servant granted the power to sin?
So that he would not be scared anymore. He would know that God would protect him.
Sometimes we need that for strength, don't we, that we just don't see. And if God even gives us a glimpse of something that kind of gives us the kind of like power to plug us in to go on. And then hopefully the next time around, this servant won't have to be shook and,
I think that would give him more, the Lord's watching out.
that he would be, as Elijah said, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with him. And that probably should be something that we have stamped on us, that we always remember, no matter what you bring against us, we have somebody that's able to change this. It says, how should this experience encourage us?
Every time the Lord answers prayer, it should give us more faith and strength to believe in His obedience course.
And even though maybe not literally that you can see, but spiritually, don't you all think we do have a band of chariots and army that we don't see with us, but God gives us the strength and the backup. So, thank you all for